Welcome to What Lies Ahead. I'm your host, Chris Ruffini, lead singer of the Long Island band Overthrow. On my podcast, I explore everything related to the hardcore scene through the eyes of artists, promoters, and record labels. As always, please like or subscribe on all social media platforms. Today, on What Lies Ahead, I'm joined by Artie, lead singer of the 90s Long Island hardcore band Milhouse. The band made their mark with their LP, Obscenity in the Milk, a record that captured the band's chaotic, sharp, and heavy sound. Artie also fronted Indecision during a pivotal stretch, bringing his voice to a band that was well known for its intensity and purpose. We'll talk about each band and their writing process. Artie, what's going on, man? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. It's cool to join you. I've listened
Yeah,
to
of
your
course.
episode, and it seems like a fun time.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm excited for the conversation. And so I guess we'll talk a little. The LP, Obscenity in the Milk, it's been now 2 years, 25th. The 25th anniversary was 2 years ago when it was re-released with some bonus tracks and honestly, some of the things when you hear these songs now, and I remember hearing them back when it came out, but when you hear them now, you could hear them today. Like I could see you guys on the stage at Hellfest playing these songs with like communion and of epic proportions. Like they it doesn't sound like a 1990s record. Like it could be played today, which is that's a sign of a great record. And we'll
Compliment,
get
yeah.
into all that stuff.
Okay.
We'll obviously get into all that, but I just wanted to start with that because that record does have that sound, and still does to this day. It holds super strong. But let's start with you, obviously, a little bit. I've been doing this podcast now for a few months now, and you've indirectly come up on this podcast quite a few times in terms of booking
Yeah,
shows and just your history with Long Island hardcore. You know, you're a mainstay, whether it's been with Milhouse and all the other things that you've been doing. So why don't we get started in the beginning with you here? How your interest in music, which led to going to shows, booking shows, all that kind of stuff into Milhouse.
sure. Well, I mean, I had this conversation recently with someone where it was actually at JFK Airport, ironically, some random dude I met and struck up a conversation while we were standing in Terminal 4 waiting for our bags for like hours. But I was telling him that I got interested in music pretty early, like around, I would say, I learned very early on how to scam the Columbia Record and Tape Club, where you mail in a penny and
So
you get
many
like,
of us.
yeah. So I hope the statute of limitations has run out, but I would sign up under like multiple names and just get all those tapes sent to like my house and my grandmother's house, and I never followed through with buying anything. So I would get like anything I heard on the radio. My mom and dad were into like classic rock, so I liked like AC/DC and Foreigner and Led Zeppelin and all that shit. And I also liked like all the Billy Joel and Hall and Oates and anything. And I was just kind of glomming music up at that age, kind of just to have something to do. I was into music and comic books from a very early age, and then later, I've told the story a few times that my mom had a guy who was sold her pot, basically, this guy Carl, who was a pretty nice guy, but he would come over and he would end up babysitting us, which is not a good idea to have a drug dealer babysit your kids, but it seemed to work. So he sort of had all these other tapes in his car, and he had a Mohawk, and he had in his car he had like Dead Kennedys and Circle Jerks and Butthole Surfers, and I was like, this sounds ridiculous. I've got to hear this stuff, because I was into whatever I could find at that point. I had no idea that it was punk rock or that punk rock was a real thing. I thought it
Right.
was something that you saw on TV. And then I was like hooked, and I just like, it was hilarious, but it was also mean and evil, and it was like it looked cool, and the lyrics were ridiculous. So I got into that, and then you know as things happen when you're a teenager, it happened pretty quickly. And then I was like, I just started dressing like a punk rocker, and I started like hanging out with all the hardcore and punk kids in Lindenhurst High School, and sort of found my identity through that. I never learned how to play an instrument or became a guy who was like, I want to play music, I want to create music. I wanted to create all the art and structure around the music. That's what I wanted to be a part of. And that's what ended up happening. I never had the attention span to sit and tried. I took guitar lessons, I took drum lessons, and it didn't click. I was like, I just want to get to the screaming part. I want to get to the fun part, the crazy part. I don't want to do all the weird work of becoming a musician.
Mhm.
So that's kind of that was my initial path. And then got into kind of I was friends with the Mind Over Matter guys in high school, with John and George, and I really liked them, and I wanted to be a part of that thing they were doing, and also the Neglect guys, and I wanted to somehow be a part of it, but I wasn't in the band, so I wanted to find ways to help them play so I could see them, as well as the other bands that I was getting into at the time. I wanted to see those bands live, and there wasn't a lot of places on Long Island that would host those kinds of shows. There was
Yeah.
one guy doing shows, Tyler King, and he was, he kind of had a monopoly on this venue or that venue, but they were very fleeting. So I just found some venues and started figuring out the ropes, all just totally on my own, and how to set up a show and how to work with the venue owner, how to get the bands to kind of um, organize, how to get it, how to rent a PA, what a PA does,
Mm.
uh, all that stuff. And then kind of that was what catapulted me into like the scene, the larger scene, and then eventually wound up forming Milhouse with Brian, who was at the time he was in Loyal to None,
Mhm.
and we were like we wanted to do some kind of band that was kind of like Scapegrace, kind of like Angel Hair. We were into the screamier, kind of more um, uh, artsy but aggressive bands that were happening at the time, Born Against and so on. And we were like, let's do a band like that. Um, and that's how that came about. And so we didn't know what the fuck we were doing. It's when you tell me that the band has am I allowed to curse? Is that's okay, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Like, wait a minute. So yeah, we just kind of figured it out. We were like listening to a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and then we were just writing songs. So when you say that it's like a timeless album, or that it holds up today, that's like really flattering, because we weren't even thinking about next year, much less 27 years. We were like, let's just fucking let's just play what we want to play, and go crazy, and yeah, and that's kind of that part of the story. I don't know if I answered the question or if I went
No,
on
you
too long.
absolutely did. And it kind of leads into a couple of different things, and we're definitely going to get obviously into Millhouse. But the one piece with the show piece I want to talk about, it was like you kind of dove headfirst into that, and it's cool because I've had Scanlon on, I've had Christian on, Joe Harcourt, all people
Yeah,
who've booked shows, and people sometimes, and I'm going to date ourselves to the '90s here. They see a flyer and they're like, "Ah, a show is put together," but
right.
really don't realize the work that gets involved in it in terms of some of the stuff that you were describing, the tremendous amount of organization, honestly, the patience that you have to have. I mean, I put a few shows together back in the day, like at Dr. Shays, but it was just some hole in the wall bar. They had the stuff. We get our
Sure.
friends bands and then we get E-Town to headline. You know what I mean? Like, so you were
Right.
getting like warehouses and other places and all these kind of things
Yeah.
to do that. And the reason why I bring that up is because I part of doing this podcast too is I love talking about the music piece, but it's also if like one person's listening to this and hears you about how you went about booking shows and with Scanlon and everybody else that talk about it, like could that lead to someone else doing it? And that's how these things keep kind of snowballing kind of thing, which would be cool. Talk about that time with you doing that in terms of booking shows. Like you just said, you dived headfirst into it. And obviously you were thinking about it, but you weren't overcomplicating. You're like, okay, I got to get a place, got to get bands, get some of my friends' bands. Did you start bringing in out of state bands? Like, how did that whole process kind of work with that?
Yeah, it's a long time ago, so it's very blurry to remember it. But what I recall, just kind of like I was like 17, I think, when Mind Over Matter started playing. So I was like, at the age where I was just waiting to graduate. I was in 11th grade. I would sit there, I'd draw pictures of like hardcore shows, and like fucking make logos for bands and everything, and I would collect flyers and hang them all over my wall. So it was like, how do I know all these bands play all the time in New York City and other places, but I never get to see this happen on Long Island. So how do I do it? And or how can it happen? And I knew Tyler was doing it, but I wasn't really close with Tyler. He was like this older, scarier guy, which is kind of
Mhm.
funny now. But so I was like, well, I think we at the time we were some of us would go to this club, the Angle in
Mhm.
Mineola, which I don't know if you heard of. Do you remember that place?
Mhm.
It was like that was just like a place where one night a week it was like a dance club, and one night a week they didn't serve alcohol and they let teens in and they played alternative music, but they had like a stage. So me and like George Reynolds, we were like, I bet we could I bet bands could play here. I wonder if they would let us do that. If we talked to so we talked to the guy at the door, and he's like, I'll talk to the owner, Greg. He's just like, kind of just generic businessman guy. And he was like, I guess, if you think you can bring people. And we were like, yeah. And then I might be remembering this incorrectly, but I think maybe we did the show the first show there, and we didn't even rent a PA because we didn't know we needed one, and I think everybody sang out of like a guitar amp or something like that. So you
That's
know,
awesome though. It is.
I know. Oh,
Yeah.
and before that, we might have done something. I might have done something with Derek from Neglect, where we did a show at like a rehearsal studio in Amityville, which may or may not still be there. I don't know. It was right by the Massapequa Mall,
Okay.
and it was just like we'll rent the room for an hour and then invite all our friends to come and treat it like a show. And that might have been that might have been the first thing we did with like Mind Over Matter and Neglect playing at that place. So and then we sort of stumbled upon the angle and we put it together in our brains to do shows there. And the first show was like it was like Mind Over Matter, Silent Majority, and like I don't even remember who else. And then this, the owner was like, "Holy shit!" It was our friend's band from high school, our friend's industrial band, Boxhead.
Mm.
It's really funny. So it was just like kids, literally like a bunch of kids playing music for other kids, and tons of kids came because there was nothing to do in Long Island at the time. So on a Friday night, it was like go out and see, and Nirvana had just like broke, so it was
Mhm.
all these kids in like oversized polo shirts and shit, and they were like, the owner was like, "This was great. Like we sold, we they charged like $7 at the door, and they made a ton of money." So he's like, "Can you do this every week?" And I was like, "I guess." I never thought to get paid. I never thought to even ask to get paid. I
Right.
never thought like about how any of the financials worked. I was just like, at the end of every week, every night, he would hand me a bunch of money and I would just hand it all to the bands. I would split it up. I never even thought to do it for like profit until years after years later, I was like, I should probably try to do this and make money in it. And at that point, I had a real job. But anyway, so that was that. And then, the angle kind of, they sold the place and there were new owners and they were dicks. And so we had to look for other places. And at that point, I had been on tour in 1994. I went on my first US tour. I drove the guys in Garden Variety on tour because they
Mm.
were a three-piece band with only one member who knew how to operate a motor vehicle. So it took me on tour to help drive and sell shirts and shit. So that was my first exposure to like the US scene in all these little the DIY scene in all these little cities and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is there's a lot I don't know, but it's even easier to do it almost anywhere. All you need is like
Mm.
a PA and permission, and you can make everything happen.
Right.
So that's what came back, and I was like, "There's VFW in my town. There's this, there's that," and I started. Oh, and prior to that, somehow George Reynolds, he was the one who stumbled upon the PWAC, and I don't remember why. I think he might have gone to like a rave there or some kind of weird event there, and then talked to them about doing a benefit show for them in their room. They had that big warehouse, and he did while I was on that Garden Party tour. He actually did the first show there, which was fucking. It was like VOD, Mind Over Matter, all the usual suspects.
Yeah.
And whatever Christian's first band was, I forget, Crawl Space, I think they were called. They played.
Mm.
So I came back and George was like, "This show was huge. You missed it. It was great." I was like, "Oh, it sucks that I missed it." And he's like, "Why don't you just here's the guy's number. Why don't you talk to him? Because I don't want to do this all the time." He's like, "But if you want to do a show there, they loved it and they want to do more. So talk to the owner or the director rather of the association." And then that was it. I was doing shows there weekly. I was like, getting a bigger PA, found like a real pro sound guy that was like a real weirdo, but he would come in and bring in his shit. And then, we'd have like, started doing like VOD and all these big shows. Bloodlet played and Neglect played and
Mhm.
Mouthpiece. Every band that I liked that was a little bit at a bigger level, I was like, I can bring them to Long Island. And,
Mhm.
and then, they came to me and they were like, "Yeah, you're making us a lot of money," or no, I think we went to them. I don't remember how the conversation started, but we were like, "Look, we're doing more shows than we can even manage at this point," because the touring bands were starting to come through Long Island at that point, which was great. All like, fucking Chokehold and all these other bands were like making it avail. They were making it a point to come to Long Island just because the scene was growing so fast and it was so big and everybody was so earnest and psyched. It wasn't like it wasn't like playing in front of New York city crowds where people half the crowd is just like arms folded and
Yeah.
waiting to be entertained. It was like kids were hungry for anything. So we were like doing 2 3 shows a week, and I was like, look, why don't we just pay you a flat amount? We'll sublet the space from you and we'll call it something else, and you'll get a fixed amount of money every month, and then we'll commit to do like 1 or 2 benefit shows a year or something like that for you. And they were like, that's even great because they made more money, we had more freedom, and that was it. And then that continued for a while until we got shut down by by the Cablevision people next door, because they didn't like, for some reason, they didn't like a bunch of random crusty punks spray painting their building and fucking, hanging out in their parking lot drinking all night. So they shut it down. Could I go back in time with what I know now? Because as I was basically still a kid. I was like, that was 96. They shut it down, so I was like 22.
Yeah.
Kind of like
It was
I
the
was
last show,
still.
Sick of It All, right? It was like Sick of It
That
All,
ended up
Sound
being the last
Majority.
show.
Yeah.
December 6th, 1996, actually. So
Yeah.
knowing what I know now, I could go back and I could negotiate. I could offer different solutions. I could approach it from a more tactical standpoint where I could probably work with them to make something happen that satisfied everyone. But at the time, I was just like, this is what we do. We're just trying to do something cool for the kids, and that didn't fly with like the fucking the Long Island Fire Commissioner or the Suffolk County Fire Commissioner or whatever the fuck. So we got shut down, and then I did shows here and there at like VFWs and then I moved to Brooklyn when I joined Indecision in '98
Yeah.
and started doing shows soon after that at like I did a couple of shows at North Six, which I don't think is there anymore, and some other places. And then I was at that point there were other people already doing it. Like Christian was coming up and he was doing more shows, and I was like, I'm exhausted, and I have to deal with all these bands, and I kind of fell out of it, and I wanted to just travel and go on tour. I ended up moving to Baltimore in 2000, and then that was that. But actually, going back a little bit, like the whole process early on when I was diving headfirst into it was interesting because, like I said, I would just split up all the money between the bands. And the first time I got a band that was like, it was like Black Train Jack, I think. They were like, we'll come out to Long Island, but we need a guarantee of $100. And I was like, 100 these rock stars need a guarantee? Who do they think they are? $100. How am I hope I can cover that. And I was like, go doing the math in my head, like Beautiful Mind style. Like, I'm like, it was so stupid, but I was like, again, and then that kind of, I learned like, oh, it's not really that much to ask and it's reasonable. And then I learned how to like structure door deals, feed the bands is something I hadn't thought of at that point. So, yeah, like, but the bands like Super Touch and Black Train Jack, and like sort of like in my mind in the early 90s, the bigger bands from the New York hardcore scene were like asking for like $100 or $150. And I was like, oh man, this is a lot of stress. I don't know. I hope I can do this. And it's kind of funny to look back on it now.
It's cool.
Right.
It's cool how you could take this stuff with you now.
Yeah, it's funny. I got the job I have now that I've had for 19 years. I got through basically another hardcore kid who was like kind of a higher up in this company. This guy Patrick West, he did a fanzine called Change. He was like a New Jersey sort of DC area hardcore guy, and he gave me my job because they needed somebody with half a brain to do some grunt work. But I kind of rose up in the ranks, and I think a lot of what I did brought to my career, which has become my career, came from that process of dealing with bands, dealing with a whole variety of different people with different points of view and different attitudes and different mental disabilities and all sorts of things that help me kind of communicate. I realize the job that I have now is basically 99% communication, and I learned a lot about that. Just getting kind of kicked around. Some people were really nice, some people were cool, some people were helpful, some people were awful, some people were really stuck up, and I kind of had to navigate all that, and sometimes be all that in one show. So I remember one time that was kind of funny. I booked a Nihilistic show at the Angle. It was like Nihilistics and Berserkers and some other band, and I always wanted to see Nihilistics, and I had a special place in my heart for them because two of the guys were from Lindenhurst. So I was like, all right, I booked this show, and they did their thing. I don't know if you know much about what the Nihilistics do, but they're deliberately horrible. But it was great. It was a great show. And then the guy gets off stage and they're packing up, and the bass player who I talked to book the show, he's dead now, but he came up to me and he's like, so are we getting paid? And I'm like, yeah, I'm settling up. And I gave him what I thought was a fair amount of the money. And he was like, no, you promised us $750 or some absurd amount. And I was like, no, I don't think we ever talked about that. And he's like, what? And he goes, Ron, come here. And he calls the singer over, Ron Rancid, and he's like, this guy's not giving us our guarantee, blah, blah, blah. And they both start getting in my face, and then Ron is like, I'll take you behind the bar and I'll get it out of you one way or another, and like basically threatening to rape me. And I was like, and then then they stop and then they just start cracking up. And they're like, no, we're just fucking with you. This is great. Thanks. And they just, I
I was
was,
kind of hoping that's where it was going, right?
yeah,
So,
like 60 solid seconds. I was terrified. I was like, what did
like,
I do?
what
What
the
have I done?
hell?
Yeah. But it was,
Yeah.
so stuff like that. You just kind of learn to kind of, and, wait and see
Hmm.
how
And
everything
dealing and
settles.
speaking, right, with all different forms of kind of people, like,
Yeah.
it definitely, yeah, like, I could only imagine, so bringing at that time too with Milhouse, so you were kind of doing both a little bit until, like you said before, you moved on and started, touring,
Right.
or you booked here and there. So Milhouse, it came about like you said you started writing, you and Brian guys started writing, put it together, like you kind of had an idea of the style you wanted to go through. When you guys were writing, did the songs come together fast that you had? Did you try them out, like whether you were playing live, and
Mm.
did he come in with music and then you came over with a lyrical cadence over it, or it just kind of like you had a notebook of lyrics and you just threw things over that you felt worked over the music? Like, how did the writing process and all that go?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I kind of glossed over, right after Mind Over Matter broke up. I briefly did a band with Eddie Reyes, who was in Mind Over Matter, and some other
Mm,
guys. Paul, who went on to be in Silent Majority, and we were called No Thought. And we played like 3 shows or something, and that was my
okay.
first experience. And I don't know why I was singing because I had no prior experience singing. But Eddie was like, "You sing," and blah blah blah, and I would just scream, and that's what I got my first taste of, like, I guess I got to write words. And I was always like kind of creative, and I like reading. Grew up on comic books, so I was like, all right, so whatever lyrics I wrote for that was garbage. But when we started doing Millhouse, and then that one, I was like, I think I could do this for real. It was really hard. Brian would just write the songs. Brian's like, the day after, like, said we wanted to do the band, Brian was like, all right, I wrote 12 songs. And we were like, fuck. So I had to kind of figure out what to do with it. So we had, like, I would kind of come up with um stuff that just sounded different. And like I said, I was influenced by a lot of those. I don't want to use the word screamo, but in retrospect, I guess they're called screamo. So I was
Yeah.
influenced by a lot of those bands, and I was kind of like writing a lot of personal, very cryptic lyrics. And at first, I would kind of write stuff, and I didn't know what it meant, and I would just kind of apply that to the song and fit it into the song, and it kind of worked. But then I realized that the stuff that was coming out had a lot to do with personal experience. I was writing in a very metaphorical way. This is where I start to sound like total, like, pretentious art douchebag. But this is like, that was my approach. Was kind of like, not consciously at first, it was unconscious, but I realized, it sort of came to me that I was channeling a lot of trauma, channeling a lot of personal issues that I had with my family, and even my current friends at the time. And I was figuring out how to, for lack of a better term, turn it into poetry. And
Yeah.
that was, once that clicked, once I realized that's what I was doing, even though I had been doing it without realizing it. That's when we were kind of rolling, when the band was kind of like playing a lot, and we were playing any show we could get. And that's when I got kind of more serious about it, and put a little more effort into writing. And my big things were, I didn't want to be like anyone else. I didn't want to write lyrics that could be like, that's like this kind of thing, or that sounds like this, and I didn't want to write any lyrics that had, I was trying my best to not fit in. So I was writing,
Mm.
I would write stuff, can't have any rhymes in it, can't have any sing-along parts. you know I was like striving to be as unpopular and uncatchy as I could be, and just almost out of spite. And that was how I approached everything. And then I started to kind of, that became my personal identity. It was just being spiteful, contrarian, causing
Mhm.
problems, not resolving them. And that was kind of sort of the way I lived when I was in Millhouse. And it like, kind of like, what you would call an edge lord. Now I was kind of like trying to be an edge lord without, when that term didn't exist. I was trying to be like deliberately stirring shit up. And I was reading the Satanic
Mhm.
Bible, so I was bringing a lot of that into. I was very
Mhm.
influenced by all the Anton LaVey stuff and all the sort of stuff that surrounded that, the peripheral stuff. And I was like, this is not something that anybody else is talking about or doing in
No.
punk. So I was like, let's introduce this. And it was actually Brian that kind of turned me on to that. So it was a band thing where we were like, we're a satanic hardcore band. And it's kind of funny looking back, but some of it was some of it was came from an earnest intellectual place, and some of it came from a place that was just like we just wanted to be like fuck you all the time. So
That's
that's
what the cool combo was with everything, and it was very obvious. And you guys also had a very intense live show, which was great, And even seeing you guys, I saw you a couple of years ago at the Monarch.
right.
Um, yeah, right with Sam Majari. It's like as if nothing changed. It really was like it was as if nothing changed with that energy on stage. And I think that it catapulted into the music in terms of what you guys did and gave that energy, which was great. So talking about your live show, um, which is like we're going back to the late '90s or mid '90s now, but also even think about when you played AMH, you also played the Monarch, I think, right? You guys played in December,
Yeah.
'03,
Yeah.
no 23,
uh,
23, '03.
23.
Um,
Yeah.
how'd you go about structuring your set list? Because you had the record that came out reissued, you had bonus tracks. Were there songs in your set list that you have never played, or songs in your on the record that you've never played? Are there songs that you didn't play that you wish you'd play? And how's that go about in terms of how you guys picked your set list?
It was a combination of, as all things these days happen, when we agreed to do the show, it turned into a band text thread, right? So it was like all the guys in the band like, well, what are we going to play, what are we going to play, and drafting a set list and stuff. And it was also, it's a combination of what you want to play after, and what you can play after 27 years, like what you remember or what you can physically do. There's a lot of physical stuff in punk and hardcore, and our band too, where it's like, you just can't fucking hack it, like I you just can't. I can't sing for like, a straight minute without breathing anymore or something like that. And our drummer's got like, he hadn't
And you
played
had the
drums.
mask on that night. I was like, how the hell's he breathing? I'm like, wow, that was
He,
amazing that you did that
he's a
that night.
psychopath, and that's a whole other conversation, but he did a good job. Yeah, he we had a bunch of songs we wanted to play. I think we played. I don't think there was anything we didn't play that we would have wanted to. I would have. There's a song that we did for a compilation that was like right before we broke up, called Ladies Night, and I always like that song. And I would have liked to have played. That's like 20 seconds long or something like that. Um, but it's also kind of petty to sing because it's about a relationship I was in that ended, 25 years ago. So there's no real, I don't know, a lot of that stuff. When I would sing for Milhouse when we played in the '90s, I I was trying to be authentic. I wanted to be sincere. I didn't want to be a fake band. I didn't want to be a band that just kind of went through the motions and acted a certain way and whatever. So I was trying to channel real feelings and real thoughts, and that was just how I was kind of trying to process a lot of stuff. So um, when all that stuff that is in the lyrics from that point was stuff that was going on in my life. It was stuff about, this girl I was in and out of relationship with. There was friends that I was friends with at the time they would disappoint me or piss me off, and I would try to form a song around that. And you go back 25 years later, in Brooklyn, when you're in your late 40s and you're on stage and you're like, how do I channel all this stuff that doesn't I don't give a
Mhm,
shit about anymore? I can't.
mhm.
So I had to kind of put myself in that mindset, but there was a certain amount of performance. There was more performance that came into a conscious
Of
performance
course.
versus and I've been in a bunch of bands since then where I've kind of gotten into certain aspects of performing and being on stage and saying and doing certain things, and that was, so I just kind of brought all that to bear. So it was kind of like, in a way it was like the Millhouse from the '90s, but in another way it was like all of us and our life experience coming back and sort of re-injecting that into a new version of Millhouse, if that makes any sense. I don't know, kind of.
Absolutely does. Absolutely does. And it was great. You guys were great that night.
Thanks.
But now that you think back with it a little bit. How do you look at the LP now, right? Because like we're talking about how like unique it was, you guys, and even the way you were describing how back then when it was written, when you put it out, how you were performing. But
Yeah.
there was also it was very genuine. It wasn't like you were trying to do all these things. It was like this was you guys when you were up there. Um, how do you look back on that record now? With wreckage and everything when you hear it and stuff like that. Because I told
Yeah.
you how I feel about it, but it doesn't matter how I feel about it. Like it's how it still holds up. But how do you when you look back on it now?
Ironically, it matters more about how you feel about it than I feel about it, because it sounds stupid, but like, as man, I don't want to refer to myself as an artist, but like as an artist puts their shit out there, right? And then it's there for the other people to think about and use and repurpose and change and interpret as they want. So I approach art in that way, where it's like, I've done this. This was my way of expressing myself. Now I no longer own it. It's just somebody else's. It's just in the world.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
wait a minute. I got off track. What the fuck was what was the question? Sorry.
Well, just how you look at the that record now. You
Oh
know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of look at it.
Mhm.
I'm proud of it. Um, I don't like to hear myself at all. Usually, I don't like to listen to my own music because it freaks me out. But especially Milhouse, because it just sounds like this fucking twisted up little kid. But it is. I do like it. I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of the songs. I'm proud of. I feel like the lyrics hold up. I think somebody else who maybe just discovering the band or discovering punk music or something could read it and get something out of it or kind of find it cool or weird, and that's good. I like the kind of weird way we approach the artwork, and that kind of like free form
Yeah.
writing
Cool. Cool
edit on
cover.
the back,
Yeah.
with like weird sort of story that I was trying to tell. And and if you ask Brian or any of the other band members, you'd probably get a different answer. But for me, I'm proud of it, but I don't. Um, I try not to really think about it a lot. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely does.
It
Yeah. No, I
bothers
know
me
what
to
you mean.
think about
Yeah.
it in some
Yeah.
ways.
No, absolutely. I guess let's turn gears into Indecision at that point. Not, I don't know how we're going to go back farthest, but years. But I'm going to say, was it around '98? I guess is when you started up,
Yeah,
like it started up.
I
Yeah.
do.
How did that come about? Like, obviously, I know you were always friends with them. That Tom ended up, was not long longer in the band. How did it end up that you jumping on with them? Because I said to you this before, and I even said it to you guys back in the '90s, which you're definitely not going to remember that, but I do. That Release the Cure is an incredible album. I think it's such a really good album. There's some great songs on it. Heavy. I think your vocals complement it really, really well. Even the older stuff, their older songs, was super, super heavy. And we Overthrow played with you guys quite a number of times
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
when you were with the band. So why don't let's talk a little bit about that? Like, did they have stuff written and then you came in with stuff written over it, or was songs already written with like how they kind of had it done, and then you came in and gave your style? Like, do you remember that time period a little bit in terms of how that came about?
Yeah, I mean it came about kind of organically because Millhouse, Indecision, and also Silent Majority would all tour together and play together all the time. So we were all pretty tight, and we all had our petty little disagreements inside that group too. But for the most part, we were all like pretty tight with each other. We all got the For Those I Love I'll Sacrifice tattoo and all that stuff. So yeah, they at some point, because touring will do this, weren't getting along with Tom for one reason or another, and Millhouse was falling apart for like the third time. Like we had already had a lineup change in '96 where half the band quit and me and Brian got all new people. But at this point, Millhouse was just kind of like it had hit a wall. So and I was like, the Indecision guys were like, "Why don't you come and sing a few songs and see how it sounds?" And I was like, "I could do that. That could be fun." And I was like, in my mind, going to do both Millhouse and Indecision together, and that never happened. Millhouse kind of fell apart because once I joined Indecision, I moved into Brooklyn. I moved in with Justin and Rachel in the same apartment, and then it was just like a full time thing. It was like that we lived and breathed the band. We had we would temp at the same places in between tours, and we would fucking go shopping at the same supermarket, and it was all just like every day was something new. We had to print T-shirts and do this and do that. So as far as the songwriting, the first thing we did was that To Live and Die in New York, which was kind of the way
EP.
to,
Mhm.
yeah, the EP. It was kind of the way to establish that this is Indecision now,
Yeah.
for the world. And Wreck Age wanted to put it out. So we were like, okay, so that was like a combination of some new songs we had put together, which Justin was the primary lyric writer for Indecision,
Mhm.
which surprised me. I was like, oh, the singer isn't writing the lyrics. So he was like, yeah, we're gonna use all these songs that I wrote, and then I have these other songs that I have a chorus here for this one, or I have nothing here for this one. So I'd be like, all right, hand it to me and I'll do it. So I wrote like oh man, I can't remember all the songs, but there was a song Dead on that album that that
Another
was the
good one.
first song I wrote all the lyrics for, and that was fun. And then he had, I can't remember the other songs. It was like Hello Cruel World, where he had like
Yeah.
a chorus or or a verse and a chorus, and I did the rest, and then it became more collaborative. And that's how we approached it then from that point on. Then we did Release the Cure kind of the same way, where Justin would, or not even just Justin, but the band would write the songs together. Justin would sketch out some lyrics here and there, about 50%, and then I would plug in the rest. And or if I heard something I really liked, I'd be like, let me have this one. I want to do the whole thing, and like sort of struggle through it that way. And that was great. Release the Cure, I'm proud of. I think it was good, and I haven't heard it in a long time. But ironically is the wrong word. But in reality, I liked To Live and Die in New York the best because the recording was so much fun. Recording with Don Fury, I've never had a recording
Yeah.
experience like that, where at the end of it, it's like it just sounded like a classic hardcore record at the end, and I was like so stoked. I was fucking like, I'm in Don Fury's studio. We had done some Milhouse stuff with Don Fury, but or no, that's not true. I had been in Don Fury's studio doing backup vocals for like Yuppie Side and bands like that, so I was familiar with the studio. But to actually be like holding a microphone that maybe, I don't know, maybe the microphone that Gigi Allen shoved up his ass, I don't know, just like like it was like being part of history, So
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know if I
super
answered
cool. I
the
forgot
question.
to even mention that EP, 'cause that EP was great, So you
Fun.
described how Artie was with Milhouse, right? And it wasn't an act. This is how you were. You had all these different
Yeah.
kind of things that you did in terms. Now you're in Indecision. Did
Hmm.
you? And you don't strike me, and even back then, even in this conversation, as someone you never tried to do anything or act like anything. You are who you are, like, and
Yeah.
that's what I think people appreciated about you and the bands that you were in, quite frankly. So with Indecision, though, because it's a different band, did you have to approach it differently, or you're like, this is me, this is what I'm going to do when I'm singing in this band or performing and whatever it is?
Yeah. That's a good thing to bring up that nobody's ever asked me before. It was like, because it was a different animal. It was like there were parts. Indecision was a song. It was a band that existed for years before I joined, and they had a certain way of doing things and a certain way of existing, where it was like, people wanted to go. They wanted to. Nobody moshed to Millhouse. Like maybe once in a while, people would. We mostly got like the weird stares or the creepy people in the corner that would come up to me after and be like, "I
They
really
did at
like."
AMH when you played with the
Yeah,
Weebles.
and at AMH,
I
that
was
was
at
like,
that
what
show.
is
No,
happening?
they did. That was you guys. You guys killed it that night when you played.
But the bands that influenced Millhouse were like very like turn it, fall on the floor, look at each other, embarrassed to be alive, kind of like, the whole like turning inward vibe. And then the bands, Indecision, and the bands that surrounded them and the bands they play with was all like extra, out, like fucking, like, you're making a declaration to the world. And that was like the music kind of directed the way that I acted. I wasn't like, well, I'm gonna like stomp around on stage and act like a tough guy now because I'm in Indecision. I couldn't never do that. But it was like, this is like fucking aggressive, fucking testosterone driven music in a lot of ways. So I just, this is how, when I listened to it, and I was a fan of Indecision before that. So I danced at their shows. I had seen them all over the country and Europe and everything. So I was like, this is what I want out of this band. Now I get to be the thing that I want out of this band. My main problem with Tom, and who I'm friends with now, I have no issue with Tom, but when he was in the band, I would be like, man, he would always turn away from the audience, and he wouldn't, he would kind of like stand in one place. And I'm like, this music is like so fucking big. You got to like explode. And so when I got the opportunity to do it myself, I was like, oh, I'm going to do it the way I think Tom should have been doing it. And that sounds shitty. I'm not trying to pick on Tom, but that was kind of my approach to it at the time. Tom's a good guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I agree. Like, Indecision was always just a powerful, heavy
Right.
band. They sound even heavier live now. Like when they play, it's like they almost sound better now than they did back then, and they sound great back then. They
I
really
know.
do. They
Right.
kill it every time they play live. You guys toured too. I remember you. I think you were on that Sick of It All tour. You guys moved around a lot. You got to play around. You guys played a lot, and then it obviously it kind of ended. Was there talk of making maybe another record, or it just kind of ran its course a little bit?
It kind of imploded for a lot of reasons, and a lot of it I'll put at my doorstep. I was very hard to get along with at the time. I was kind of, like I said earlier, I was going through a lot. I don't feel like I was a grown ass adult until maybe I was like in my 30s. That's the first time I was like, oh, I'm a grown up. I didn't feel like that at the time. I just felt like, well, this is just who I am, and I'm a shitty kid, and I'm going to die young, so whatever. And so I had that attitude around me all the time. So I would always, if there was if they wanted to do something, I was always the guy that's like, well, I don't want to do that. They wanted to play Warped Tour or something, I'd be like, "Fuck Warped Tour, we're you know, punk band," and like, you know, it's stupid. That was just, but that was my brain at the time. You know, you're allowed to be stupid as long as you eventually get smart. So yeah, we toured a ton, and that'll put a strain on any
Right.
relationship. We toured like most of the year for 2 solid years, where we had a booking agent and a manager, which, you know, I've never had that in any other
Right.
band. But they were like, "All right, you know, when you get home from this tour, you're going out again with I don't even know, you know, just like whatever." It was like Sick of It All, and it was Turmoil, and then in between it was like we're playing this bar with Soul Sick, and we're playing this place with Madball, and we're playing whatever, and that was we just did everything. We just took everything. We didn't say no, and you know, all over Europe, all over the States, and then eventually we just fucking hit a wall. Like I had been straight edge most of the time that I knew everybody, and then at some point, like in the late '90s, I was like, I want to drink, and I never looked back. But they that caused a problem in the band too, because I would get drunk and I would fucking, you know, whatever, be a real asshole, and I would fucking, you know, I was my main at some point. I feel like my main drive for 90% of everything I did was just chicks. Like I was just like, how do I get with another chick? You know,
Mhm,
I was
mhm.
just like sex crazed. So this was a bad formula to have like a band that's like supposed to be like, you know, and then Bago quit, and that should have been the sign that we had it would have run its course. Bago was like the heart and soul of Indecision.
Yeah.
You know, he's like the nicest guy in the world. And then we got Joe Rubino to fill in, and that was fun. We did a tour with Walls of Jericho and with Joe in the band, and then we were doing it as a 4 piece, and then we were in like on a tour with Kill Your Idols in San Antonio, Texas, and I was singing, and there was like nobody there. It wasn't San Antonio, it was El Paso, and there was like fucking 5 people there, and it was, you know, it's just one of those shows you play on a tour to get to the next show. You know, you're just kind of like
Mhm.
whatever. I was trying to be into it, but I couldn't be into it. I was exhausted. I was tired. I was broke. We were all fighting, and I just wanted a beer. So I was singing on stage, and I had a beer in my hand. And then Rachel was like, "If you don't put that beer down, you're out of the fucking band." And I was like, "Fine, I quit." And that was it. And then that was the end of me and
That
Indecision. And then I drove
that was
home.
it, yeah. Well, you're
Drove home.
right, like, and a lot of bands, even like, we did not as extensive as you obviously did, but, just going out touring, playing, all that stuff, and you hear other bands talk about it, it's wearing, and and you remember you were in your early 20s probably at that point in time, right? I mean, you're still a kid. You are. I mean, you're a young adult, but you're still a kid. But the big thing with all of this is, and it's for everybody with this, right? It's like you hear this is self-reflection is such a powerful thing, but when you're that age, you're not thinking of it most of the time, like most of the time. And you said yourself, it's like, you got there with it and things are good now. Like
Yeah.
that happens. Like, that's going to obviously happen.
Concerning for some people, yeah. You know?
Mhm. It does. It does. But it's also the fatigue and the exhaustion of all that kind of stuff. Like you just name some random place that you guys just played, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You know,
it's
just like,
exhausting. Yeah. Yeah.
and we went through so much. Like it was not. We were like kind of a. You know, we had a good rep. We were doing well touring. We weren't as big as like Sick of It All by any means or anything like that. But we would have good shows in a lot of places. But then shit would happen where we'd go to Canada, and we couldn't. We got fucking all our money confiscated at the border, or we trying to drive to Poland. We got held at the border of Slovakia and almost put in jail and all this shit. And this was just like, no matter how, like, there's only a certain level of popularity pre-turnstile era that a hardcore band can kind of achieve. You know, like you're not gonna end up living and paying your rent and doing all that shit just by being in a punk and hardcore band, most likely.
Mhm.
So it was kind of like, well, all this work, all this stress, and I still have to like figure out the rest of my life. Like I can't even save money. So
Yeah.
it just built up, and just and it exploded. So I think that's why a lot of bands break up with similar experiences, honestly.
Honestly, most if not everybody has said that on here, or just even of conversations I've had with like people with it, which makes complete sense. So,
Hmm.
looking ahead, now you played some reunion shows with Milhouse. I'm
Yeah.
gonna actually throw any chance of like would Milhouse ever have a 3-4 song EP, a new material, or or play a show? I mean, the shows are always never say never with shows, but like, what do you think the future could hold for like someone like with Milhouse?
Yeah, I mean, we briefly talked about doing another show. it came up a couple months ago where there was. It's a long story, but we were going to play that show that Dead Guy is playing on Long Island, and it's kind of funny because we have a
Oh,
history
it's
with
still
Dead
suit,
Guy.
right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's still
Mhm.
sued, and it was kind of like that we I caused a lot of problems with the Dead Guy guys after Keith and Tim left, so they don't like me a lot. So that was going to make it fun. That's why I wanted to play. But then we couldn't make it happen for a few different reasons. But so there's possibility that we would play in the future if the right scenario came up. We don't want to just play for oh
The
make a
random.
couple bucks and yeah, it's like doesn't it has to mean something. We played the reunion in 2003 for uh, a friend who ended up passing away from cancer. It was a benefit for
Mhm.
him. And then we played again in that show, and that was it. That's the only reunions we've done, and that was more like a big reunion of everybody, of the whole group of people, than just a band reunion. So that's why that felt more important. But we might do a show. I know Brian's. We were so high off the endorphins off that show, where it was so fun, and all the other bands were so good, and we got to see all these people, and we were like, oh, would we do it again? And Brian's like, well, I still have these songs and whatever. And so it was kind of talked about at the time, but then we never really followed up. Life kind of got in the way. Brian's got
Yeah.
an adult daughter going into college, or like a fucking soccer scholarship. I've got two kids. Like, it's just like
Hard.
tough. But I'm not gonna rule it out. But it would take a lot. It would take a lot to carve out the
Does
time.
take a lot.
Yeah.
It does. That's why, I asked that. That'd be cool to see, but it's cool that the window's like it's open, like it's just a matter of you
Yeah.
guys jumping through when you have the time.
Yeah, yeah. There's some bands that have like that animosity. They'll never talk to each other again. The grudge will always be held or whatever. With
Not
us,
there.
it's all just we still all talk pretty regularly, and we all like each other's bands and everything else. So there's really nothing holding us back except for just the process of me being in Chicago and everybody else having like we're all adults and all that shit.
Well, time, it's tough. Like even you and I, like we set this up, we threw some dates out there that we could mutually, you and I agree to. Like after this, I jump off. My kids have baseball games until like 11 o'clock tonight.
Nice.
So,
How old are your kids?
so yeah, yeah,
How
I
old,
guess so.
how old are
So
they?
last question here. Yeah, last question. Then we'll end off here with. Then I have a bunch of questions. Yeah, first thing that comes to mind. But what with this? What advice? And you kind of said this throughout here, but if you sit back and think, because you started doing this early '90s, um, and you were doing things as if, honestly, like as if almost like running a business in a way. Like you weren't thinking of it that way. You were running freaking shows and speaking
Right.
to like clubs and setting things up, and speaking to like when the PWAC closed, unfortunately, you're talking to when you talk to the department, fire department. I mean, it's like insane. And you're like 18, 19 years old as this is going on. So, what if you think back with certain things that you would give your advice to yourself as a teenager?
Oh man. Um, I think whenever you're dealing with difficult people, which is a lot of it, it's like dealing with difficult bands, difficult booking agents, like you said, the fire department, police that would show up to shows, all that stuff. And you're dealing with people that sort of come to the table with a problem, or they're there to, there's a conflict that arises. Really, the other side, what I would tell myself is that people really just want to be heard and understood, and that's half of the battle. So if
Mhm.
somebody comes at you with a complaint, the Long Island mentality, you can tell me if I'm wrong here. The Long Island mentality is like, no, fuck you. And you tell them why you're upset. And
Mhm.
then you go back and forth, and then you pull a bat out of you under your seat and stuff. You throw a
It
battery
never
at
ends well. Yeah.
yeah. uh, but the real way to do it is to be like, oh, okay, I understand. I see where you're coming from. Uh, that sucks. How can we fix it? And here's my point of view. And approaching it calmly and sort of with empathy. It sounds like the wrong word, but it's a little bit of like just acknowledging that the other person's got a problem, that it needs to be solved, and you may be able to help solve it. And that gets you through so much. And if I was able to do that, if I had that process in my head, back when I was sitting in a big room with Cablevision executives and the fire department and the police department, I would have been probably able to kind of control that in a way that had a good outcome. But I was just so punk rock and so Long Island that I couldn't, I couldn't articulate it other than to be like, fuck you,
Yeah. No,
that was my whole.
such great advice, and it's crazy too when I think back about that. When you were saying that, I was thinking that, and then I think I asked you something else, but it was like you had to be 18, 19 at the time, right? Or even if you were 20, right? I mean, you're
That was
sitting in a
96.
room, you're a
22.
teenager,
Yeah.
20.
I was a young adult.
Yeah,
Hmm.
young adult, right? You're sitting in a room and like these guys are, I'm sure, older and they're, I'm just envisioning if I'm sitting and speaking to someone at that age and I'm having a conversation about like booking shows, it's actually amazing if you think about it, like crazy experience.
It was a crazy experience, and yeah, keep in mind I was 22, but
Me too.
I grew up like kind of without a dad. Um, my all my role models were like Paul Bearer from Sheer Terror and like fucking Brendan
Mm.
from SFA. So I was a maladjusted young adult. I didn't really have any kind of
Right.
social emotional equipment. So yeah, it is amazing. I'll give myself some credit for having all that baggage and still being able to get something done. But I could have done a lot better had I been a little bit less of a dick.
Mhm. I always think back. I always think back though, it's just, and we've talked, the PWAC comes up on here all the time. It has to. It's just an
Okay.
amazing place. It's a historic, legendary place. I mean, let's be honest. Let's
I
let
know.
and the place was a fucking warehouse. And some
Good.
of the best hardcore shows on Long Island went through that place. It's amazing,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah. So many bands. I mean, even the bands that a lot of people remember the Sick of It All shows and the VOD shows and stuff like that. But sometimes I think about like Dystopia played there, and
Yeah.
fucking the the Boll Weevils and all these other bands and Cannibal Corpse played there. Not a lot of people remember that. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, all that
You
shit
got
is
guys, Biohazard, you got, right? You got
yeah,
Biohazard when they were Biohazard at that point in time. I mean, they
right.
still are, but you know what I mean? Like they were in
Yeah,
their prime of when they started and stuff. So
exactly.
pretty cool stuff. So next is I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. First thing that comes to mind, you can absolutely elaborate. Um,
Mhm.
this first question kind of leads into what we were talking about booking shows. So what's not your favorite show that you booked, but a show that you're most proud of that you booked?
Oh wow. Most proud of. Um the first time I booked a veil felt really
Mm,
good. They that might have been it wasn't the first time I dealt with like a real booking agent, but it was the first time I dealt with one of the first times I dealt with this girl Margie who ran Do It Booking, and she's kind of like a big booking agent. She booked like and actually sort of related. She did 7 seconds and stuff like that. I did the 7 second show with this guy Ron at the Northport Pipeline out the skate park, which I don't know if you
great
ever
place.
was there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, but the Avail show felt because I'd seen Avail on Long Island once. It was right after a huge snowstorm. They played way out east. I think the 1.6 band and Scapegrace guys had booked a show for them and they were on tour. Nobody knew who they were and they played. And I saw them with Artie Shepherd and like it was a room full of like 20 people. Maybe Jaw was there from the Berserkers and a handful of other people. And I was like, this is one of the best live bands I've ever seen. And they played like they're playing on Madison Square Garden in front of 20 people. So when the opportunity came up to do a show for them on Long Island at the PWAC, I was like, I want everybody to see this fucking band. And
Remember
it
that
was
name?
promoted the fuck out of it. And I was so psyched. And they were so good. And they were such great people. They were earnest. They believed in everything they did. And they were like, they weren't rock stars, but but at the same time in the back end, I was learning a lot more about the business side because they had a real booking agent.
Yeah.
They were on lookout at that point. So I had to learn how to like split up money and in a different way. And they were getting they got 80% of the door after expenses. So what does that mean? So I had to sit there and like figure out what expenses were.
The math of it.
But that was kind of like I felt like that was a turning point in my show booking career where I was like I set up a really killer show with a band that I really loved and it went swimmingly and everybody was happy and then they came back and played again and again. But I felt like I had accomplished something at that show. I don't know if I'm expressing it correctly, but I felt that was kind
No,
of
you are. You are. Yeah, it makes sense with what you're saying, you
it
know?
was an accomplishment. I felt like
What was your favorite Milhouse song?
oh. um,
And talking with you now, I know you're gonna have for you, it's gonna be hard for you to say that, but there's definitely some great ones you gotta be proud of, you know?
yeah. Uh, okay. I was in this relationship that was like kind of a seminal relationship for me. I was with this girl who, I don't know where she is now, but we were like super close, and on a super deep level. But it was a time in my life where I realized that you can't have a good relationship with somebody who's exactly like you, who's exactly got the same attitude, the same shitty background, the same sort of, just weird just she was basically like a lot like me. So we fought all the time. We were both like Leos, and we just fucking argued all the time. And I wrote the song in Milhouse. It was kind of a stream of consciousness thing, which a lot of the lyrics that came out that way were. That was just like writing without thinking much about what I'm writing, just what I'm the imagery that was in my head at the time. And that was this song called Versus Excalibur, which was on it was on the album actually, but it came out first on the split 7-inch we did with Coercion, I think. I can't remember. Um, but that was always, it was super short. And it was also the song at the time that felt the most like a hardcore song to me compared to all our other songs. Like
Mhm.
I liked all of our songs, but that was one that was like 30 seconds and it's just super fast. And I had to sing like I could barely breathe. I had to like, it was like a sprint. And
Mhm.
that was always a song where I felt like, fuck yeah. Like I think that's my favorite one going back.
Cool. I think you answered it, but I'm going to ask again. Favorite Indecision song that you were part of?
Oh, I don't know if I answered it. I like that song "Dead" that I wrote was always fun to play, and
Yeah.
I was really proud of that song. And it was a song that was autobiographical because it was all about like working this shitty, waking up and going to this mind-numbing job and coming back and just looking at that as the rest of your existence. And that's what I felt like I was in store for once Indecision was gone. I was like, this is just what people do. I just go to offices like this because we had these temp jobs where we would, and we needed money on tour. We'd have downtime, or in between tours rather. We'd have downtime. We'd just go and work at this office. We had a sort of a punk rock friend that worked in a temp agency, and she'd call us at like 6 in the morning and be like, they need you at One World Trade Center, or they need you at, Fulton, whatever.
Mm.
And we'd go down there and just file things all day. This is like proto internet era. So anyway, that was a song that I liked a lot. But I think my favorite song was Dream Come True. That was always a fun song to play. That was the song
Mm.
Justin wrote. And I think they still play it
Yeah.
when they play
Yeah.
live. And that was always just the whole chorus, and then the breakdown, like,
The breakdowns. Yeah.
and the drum
Yeah.
part. Like
Mhm.
that was always my favorite one to play. It was always the one where I was like jumping around, pogoing around. It was
Mhm.
fun. So
Cool.
probably one of those two, but more Dream Come True.
Cool. So what's your the best show that you've ever played? And I guess you could break it up in either both bands. I mean, you've played so much and all over the place, but some shows that for you in terms of performing that were like most meaningful for you.
Oof. Um, that is a tough one. There's a lot that were great, and there's a lot that were terrible. I think the show that was the most great and the most terrible was when Indecision, Silent Majority, and this story has been told a little bit in different places, but Indecision, Silent Majority, and Milhouse were on tour together for a fucking 8-week tour around the
Wow.
country and Canada. Yeah, I think that was the tour that broke up Indecision. Actually, now that I think about it, but I could be wrong. Um, but the we played. We were in Vancouver, and we fucking played or we had downtime. We were walking around the city during the day. Vancouver's like a cool city, but it's got a lot of problems. It's kind of got like a lot of open air drug use and shit like that. At least at the time in the 90s, it was a lot of just fucking crime, like rampant crime. And it was we were hanging around in this park, and somehow at some point I'll try. I won't tell the whole long story because it goes on and on. But there was our van got broken into. One of the vans got broken
Mm.
into. We were 3 vans and 2 vans, and all our shit got stolen. Like a bunch of our shit got stolen. No instruments, I don't think, but personal shit like people's Walkmans and Discmans and backpacks.
Walkmans were everything back then. I mean,
Oh yeah,
Jesus.
needed that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so we actually found some of the people that like we were all like standing in the park at one point, like, what the fuck do we do? Like, we got our shit. We had chased one of the guys and he got away, and like we caught people doing it, and we were like, it was like hardcore kids running through
I
the
have
street,
heard this. Yeah, I've heard this. Yeah.
chasing junkies, and guy, I don't know if you remember this, if you're old enough to remember that at the some when people still use payphones, people would boot like these dialer things that would like, you could and you could use that
Mhm.
instead of putting a quarter in the machine because it made the sound. And we all had those, and we were standing in the park angry that we got our shit stolen, and some junky person just walks up to Brian and they're like pressing the buttons and they're like, hey, I don't know what this is. You want to buy it? and we were just
It
like,
was your stuff. Hey.
that might not even been the person who stole it. They may have just found it, but we were just like so
Right.
pissed. But anyway, we
Mhm.
get to the show that night in Vancouver, and it might have been with Strain or some other Vancouver bands. I can't remember. Um, and fucking, we were so pissed off at everything, the world, each other, ourselves, that we played so good. We played angry. We didn't stop. We played one song into another, dripping with sweat, fucking freaking out. And it felt great. At the end of the set, I felt like,
Released probably, right?
well,
Right?
totally, like,
Had
it's fine. Everything's fine. Like, it all drained out of me. And I always remember that. And I always strive to get that feeling now whenever I play, because it was such a good, like fucking, it's like taking a huge dump. It's just like, did it. That was like, that's the most memorable show, I think. I don't know if it was the best. I don't know if it was the worst, but it was, I always think of that. I think of it a lot.
No, cool to hear, man. It's almost like you needed it that night, obviously, after
Sure
everything you
did.
dealt with. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think is the most underrated band from the 90s, the mid to late 90s? And let's keep it in Long Island, I guess, because I mean you could go anywhere with it because you've seen so many different scenes. And
Definitely.
underrated, by the way, I apologize. Underrated can mean like, maybe they ended too soon, didn't get their due, that kind of stuff.
Should I say Overthrow?
That would be nice. Thank you.
Like Overthrow. I felt like you guys always had like an oi sound with the hardcore, which I liked. It always
Mhm.
felt like you were on the
Thanks.
verge of an oi band a little bit. But
Mhm.
underrated. I mean, uh, I feel like Scapegrace. My two favorite Long Island bands were Scapegrace and the Berserkers. I feel like neither band ever got what they should have gotten. Berserkers sort of reformed later in the 90s and in the early 2000s in different iterations, but that mid 90s, Mike on guitar, Tom on bass, Jaw, that was that was an unstoppable band. That should have been a band that was like Long Island's Black Flag.
Mm.
They were like that. The 7 inch is great. The demo is one of the Berserkers demo. If you can get it, or if you don't own it, or if you haven't heard it, it's on YouTube somewhere. Is one of the best fucking Long Island demos, or the best demos in any hardcore. It's so
Mm.
good. If I had a couple extra $1,000 sitting around, I would press it on vinyl just to make sure it's documented properly. But
Right.
I don't know that, and honorable mention to the Disciplinary Action demo too. I mean, for all the differences in politics, you could say, with that band, that was a fucking raging band. That was like a perfect live hardcore band.
They were good. They were
They were
really
great.
good.
They were great. That demo was fucking great. The 7 inch is great, and then they had a bunch of unreleased stuff that I have on MP3, but that never saw the light of day. But they were a great fucking band. But Scapegrace as well. It was just weirdly talented, out of nowhere, kind of nerdy punk kids from way out east. When we met them, when all the Lindenhurst kids met those guys, we were like, how do we not know these older punk rock and hardcore kids? And there was this whole other scene happening in like Eastern Suffolk that we didn't know about.
Mm.
And they were all like coming from like, the whole like the crustier kind of scummier side of hardcore, which was always the side that drew me. It was more that I found that more appealing than like the kind of like preppy hooded sweatshirt hardcore of like Gorilla Biscuits or something. I was always like, oh no, this is fucking gross people with like dirty clothes and shit. That was like what was more attractive to me.
Mm.
But Scapegrace was just that 7 inch, and all that they did a bunch. They did one 7 inch, and then they did a bunch of maybe two 7 inches, and then a bunch of splits and comps and stuff. And all that shit needs to be gathered and put in one place for posterity too. But those guys are also, I think they're kind of insane. So I don't know if they'll ever get around to doing that, but that's those are the two most underrated Long Island bands for sure, with the Scapegrace and Berserkers.
Scapegrace has come up before in here, with that question I've just asked. Then Motive
Okay.
has come up. Yeah.
Oh
They've
yeah,
they've
Motive. Yeah, have
yeah,
that.
they've definitely come up for sure
Mhm.
on here. So I think I know the answer, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Deja One or PWAC? After
uh,
that long conversation about the PWAC, but
right, right. I was definitely partial to PWAC. I like Deja One. I had a lot of good times at Deja One, but all comes down to the stage. The stage at Deja One was like up to here, and the stage at the PWAC was like down to here. And
yeah.
I felt like I was always a band that would be like, or I was a band. I approached Milhouse in a way that we'd get to a place, and if there was a stage, I'd be like, we want to play on the floor. I want it to be
Mhm.
in the crowd. Now
Right.
that's terrible for the purposes of hearing the sounds come out of the speakers. So I wouldn't do that now. But I felt like being at the PWAC, you were more part of there's more interaction, and Deja One had a little bit of a removal. But that said, it was very minor. Deja One was a cool place, and I saw a lot of good stuff there. That was around. I remember the first time I got drunk after being straight edge for years was at Deja One in New
Was
Orleans.
that Deja One?
Yeah,
Out of all the times I've been there, played there, been there, I never went in the basement, right? There was a whole other world down there, right? And I
right.
guess that's where people would hang. I guess I never realized that, but yeah.
No,
So
I know. I went down there once, like towards the end, and I was like, "Oh, this place has been down here the whole time." I didn't
yeah,
know.
it's a cool spot. Cool spot. A hardcore record you could still listen to start to finish.
Oh wow. Um, shit. Start to finish. It's funny. I have a separate part of my record collection for all my friends' bands because I never really need to hear a Mind Over Matter record again. I know all those songs are like
Mhm.
almost nursery rhymes to me. Like they're in my head, or like Silent Majority. Same thing. So it's kind of weird. I can listen to all those records start to finish and not complain and enjoy them, but on a certain level. But a record that fuck. Let me think about this for a minute. Start to finish is a tall order.
It is, isn't it?
It
Especially,
is.
I'm wondering which one that would be for me.
uh, I would. Okay, I guess they never did a proper album, but I can listen to Neglect, the Don Fury sessions. I can
Oh,
definitely
okay,
listen to that
that's
start
good.
to finish.
Mhm.
Silly as it is, and it was never meant to be released as an album. I think they recorded it just as a bunch of scratch tracks in the studio while they were doing other stuff. So but it feels like all those songs are so absurd and insane, and they're in a great way. And it's just, and it was part of my youth. It was part of my formative years. So I think I could, of all my friends bands that have records out and that I feel like they all hold a special place in my heart and that I could listen to start to finish. Neglect is probably the one where I'm like, I have to kind of stop what I'm doing and listen to them and be like,
Mm,
oh yeah, they're just all
yeah.
those parts. Like it's great. But on uh, I guess 'cause I still buy hardcore records today, but for some reason I'm blanking about anything that I can kind of think about that's really kind of pushing my buttons right now. But
Mm,
yeah, I mean, I listen a lot more death metal than I do hardcore now, but that's just
yeah.
what it is. Sorry.
No, it's all good. That Neglect one is, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Um, a band you never ended up having a chance to play with that you wish you would have, because you've played with a lot of bands with Milhouse, you've booked a lot of bands. That doesn't count you playing, but you booked, and obviously with Indecision, you toured with some big ones too. So if there's a band that you're like, oh man, I never had a chance to play with them.
Ugh. Huh. Um, it's an interesting thought because it's like, you know, what does it mean to play with a band? It means that you get that kind of feeling of being a part of what that band was doing. So
Mm,
like it's not like you can go see a band, but there's something different about sharing a stage with that band and kind of
absolutely.
being able to say like, oh yeah, we like Millhouse played with Neurosis, which was huge. We actually played with
Yeah.
Neurosis twice, which is bizarre. Um, and we almost got in a fight with Neurosis, which is another story. Which we would have lost spectacularly. Um, uh, Indecision played with a ton. Oh man, let me think. I guess shit. I guess it would have been cool to play with like in a sense we did play with Rorschach. When I was in Concrete Cross, we did play one of the Rorschach reunion shows. It was a
Cool.
small thing and that was kind of cool, but we never got to play with Rorschach or Born Against. If when Milhouse was around, that would have been a fucking huge. We would have been like high-fiving each other for like a year, if we would have got
Mhm.
to play with Born Against or Rorschach, one of those two bands, or Citizens Arrest. Those were kind of like for like Artie in 1992, 93. Those were like the three bands that were like shaping hardcore for me in a lot
Awesome.
of ways. So it would have been great to say like, to have a flyer that says like Citizens Arrest Millhouse, blah blah blah, or Rorschach and Millhouse. That would be cool. But
Awesome.
you know,
All right. Last one here. An artist or band that you like that may surprise people.
um, I got a couple.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't make any secret about how I'm a huge Billy Joel fan. I've come full circle and
Mhm.
embraced Billy Joel.
Uh-huh.
He tells great stories in his songs, and he's from an era where musicianship mattered, versus style, substance over style. Um, I also all the Long Island and heroes. I love Pat Benatar. I own every Pat Benatar record.
Mhm.
I But my favorite artist of all time, not my favorite band. My favorite band is AC/DC.
Mhm.
My favorite artist of all
Bring it back
time.
to the beginning with you, right? You were talking
Exactly.
about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. They've
Mhm.
AC/DC does one thing. They do it well, and they do it constantly. And that's
Mhm.
one thing you need in life is consistency. Something
Yeah.
you can depend on.
Mhm.
They Sinead O'Connor is like has always I've
Oh,
always been a mega Sinead O'Connor super fan from like when I was 13 or whatever, and I first heard her voice. Was like it just it's she has this everybody who sings, you sing, you strive to kind of transmit a feeling. You're not just saying words, you're saying them in a certain way. You're saying them in a way that you want to convey an emotion or convey an experience to the listener. um, I felt like she did that with every breath she took. Every
yeah.
lyric, every song. I was affected when she died. I didn't like bawl my eyes out, but I was like, that's just so disappointing because she had, she was
Yeah.
still writing material, she was still creating. I was still
Mhm.
buying all her new stuff. I was like, she's got this immense talent, but not healthy, not mentally healthy, not physically healthy, and that made it more tragic. There's just fucking to see all that go to waste because her she was the world was too big for her.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but that Sinead O'Connor might shock some people. People who know me or who are close to me know that I'm always like blah 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 Sinead O'Connor, but maybe not everybody else. Yeah,
She was super talented and had some great songs. So
yeah, in a horrible life.
yeah, 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 a lot to write about with that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Artie, thank you so much for coming on here. It's a great conversation. Anything you want to end with?
No, thanks for having me. I mean, I guess I can always plug my new band, Ready for Death. We have a new record out called Pay With Your Face. It's out on Translation Lost Records. So, I got a little bit better at self promotion over the last 30 years. So I'll get that a plug. And that's about it. No, I mean, I appreciate the time. I'm glad to see you're still doing it with Overthrow. And,
Thank you.
maybe we'll get together and do something in Long Island or somewhere else.
Would love that. Yeah, that would love that, man. Thanks. Appreciate you hanging on. Hang tight. I'm going to just sign us off here and then we'll end it off.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to What Lies Ahead, which is available on all streaming platforms. Go save the What Lies Ahead podcast playlist on Spotify that features all bands that were on the show. For more information on future episodes, you can go to my Instagram account and follow at What Lies Ahead _podcast and on Facebook by searching What Lies Ahead podcast. See you all on the next episode.